Hey, what's going on, Facebook? This is George calling. George talking. Start over, do over. Oh my god. One sentence in, and I mess it up already. Anyway, I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're staying sane out there. We'll just wait a little bit and see if anybody cares to join. Nevertheless, hey, what's going on, Dennis? Good to see you. Ken Jury, good to see you. Chris Rogers, what's going on? Skip, how you doing, man? Um, so, yeah, I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're all staying sane out there. It is crazy times right now, and it doesn't look like it's changing anytime soon. So, whatever you can do, keep your mind and body together. I highly recommend doing that because we need that right now. Um, oh, you're very welcome, Dennis. Happy birthday again. What's going on, Wythe? Raphael, good to see you. All right. So today's episode or today's live video, what's going on, Richard? Is entitled Show Preparation Episode 2. And I'm gonna try to do that. What's going on, Michelle? Good to see you. Um, I'm gonna try to do an episode like this for all the shows where what's going on, Wyatt? Where I had the chair, where I was playing the main bass player on Broadway, uh, and I think Sadi Sain, another bass player here in the city, brought up the suggestion that. I could do one of these videos as well about, being a sub in the city and my preparation for being a sub because I've worked as a sub for the last, over 10 years in a variety of shows. And so I'm thinking about that as well. I think that that might be a good topic as well. You guys let me know if you want to hear me talk about being a sub and what it takes or what the preparation for that is. But today I want to talk about this show Fun Home. And Fun Home, what's going on, John Diener? Fun Home was a show that I came to in, I believe, 2015. Is that right? Maybe 2014. Yeah, 2014 we started Fun Home. Hey Alexis, good to see you. We started Fun Home at the Public Theater here in New York in 2014. It was supposed to stay for, I believe, 5 weeks. And then we opened, or then it started, and it kind of blew up. We ended up staying at the Public Theater for close to 5 months. It was off-Broadway. The off-Broadway production was very successful. And after a pretty long wait, they managed to move the show to Broadway, to Circle in the Square Theater. And we were there, I believe, from like 2015, 2016 in that hey Marco. No, actually 5 basses and 3 doubles, so there you go, that's the answer to that. But Marco Panacea brings up a good point, and that's the kind of the topic of what I'm about to talk about today, the preparation that went into playing the show Fun Home. Fun Home was written, the music for Fun Home was written by the composer Janine Tesori, and the book for Fun Home was written by Lisa Krohn. Both of them won Tonys for the show. The show itself, once it moved to Broadway, won. I think we got nominated for 8 Tonys, and I'm pretty sure that we won 5 of them, including Best New Musical, which as I will, which was kind of unusual. We were the underdog. We were the small show that could, and our subject matter was not your usual Broadway fare. This dealt with the story of Fun Home is based on the graphic novel Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, in which she talks about her coming out as a lesbian. She talks about at the same time, growing up in rural Pennsylvania. Her family owned a funeral home, hence the name Fun Home, which was short for funeral home. And after Allison came out to her parents, her mother kind of told her, "Oh yeah, and by the way, your dad's gay." And 4 months after that, the father kills himself. All of this is a true story. None of it is made up. This is as real as it got. And that story was Alison Bechdel wrote it into her graphic novel, and then it was written into this show. So it was not a happy-go-lucky show. It was not. It was not a show about warm, fuzzy feelings and lots of dancing around, lots of jazz hands. It was none of that. It was small. It was kind of moody. And yes, it dealt with coming out, the coming out of the main character as a lesbian woman. Nevertheless, and this I always find fascinating, like, yes, that was part of the show. On the other hand, we had a live suicide. Not that anybody kills themselves, but we had an actor portraying a suicide on stage. And I always find that interesting that in American news media, people talk about the sex most of the time, and the fact that somebody offs themselves on stage in front of an audience, that doesn't even get a mention. I mean, that's I had colleagues of mine say, "Oh no, I'm not going to see the show because it's too risque and there are two women kissing and whatnot." And I'm like, "Well, dude, there's someone killing themselves." The argument was like, "No, I can't get my kids to see it." Well, not because of two women kissing, but maybe because this dude is killing himself. I mean, that would have, done something to me as a kid. But the kissing part, well, not really. Interestingly enough, like, that never gets a mention. Never. So coming back to the music, Janine Tesori wrote this piece, and it was one of those shows that you work on. Oh, wow, no, a lot of people joined. What's going on, Michael? Sadi, Corey Schutzer, Emma, what's going on? Jonathan Maron, good to see you here. Gerhard, nice to see you. All right, what's going on, Joey? It was one of those shows that had no precedent. Okay, and what I mean by that is it's completely original. There's nothing in there that we're not quoting any other music. This is all original music. Okay, and as such, it was for me one of the more difficult shows that I've ever done. There was basically no blueprint to go from. You kind of had to figure out, after hearing the music once or twice in rehearsal, okay, well, this is where I think the composer is going. Let me play something like this and see whether this works out. Okay, and here's where things get a little tricky, because sometimes composers don't really know what, especially in musical theater terms, or musical theater composers don't really know what the bass does, what the rhythm section does, and how profoundly the rhythm section can influence the vibe of a song, and how strongly the bass can influence the texture of a song, the vibe of a song, the what it makes you feel, basically. How strongly, composers sometimes don't know the amount to which we as bass players influence the outcome, influence how singers sing a certain number or how they acted, you know. All of that, hey, what's going on? Yeah, I know I'm preaching to the choir. It's all about the rhythm section, Michael. So anyway, the difficulty here was to bring this all completely original music to life and bring it into today or into whenever we were playing it. I thought that was it took me a long time to get into it. It also maybe a little bit of context. At the time, I was when I first started with the show, I was subbing at a bunch of shows. I'm trying to remember how many. It was like it went from 6 to 9 shows rather quickly, and so my mind was in subbing mode. When you sub at that many shows, you do end up playing every night, and you do end up playing a different show every night. But it is, it's a different mindset than all of a sudden you're going into a project and you have to play original music. You don't. When you're subbing, you're always trying to sound like the chair holder. Like that's the job. When you are the chair holder, you have to contribute something to the music. At least that's how I see it. It's not necessarily enough to just play the music that's on the piece of paper in front of you. It is important to get deeper into that and get a vibe for it going, and through that influence what the other musicians are playing, and consequentially what the singers are singing and how the actors are acting. So the mindsets are two very different ones. So I was coming out of a subbing mindset, and that might have contributed why I had such a hard time getting into the music. It really took me a long time. Like, I'm not usually slow to learn new music at all. With this particular piece, it took, I'm gonna say, a solid 4 or 5 weeks, to really get into it. And what made matters worse, hey, what's going on, Larry? Ray Tripp, good to see you. What made matters worse was that the way it was written required me to play a lot of instruments. Altogether, I played 5 basses in that show. I played an upright bass, arco and pizzicato. I played a Fender Precision, a Hofner club bass. I played a 5-string fretted bass and a 5-string fretless bass. So those were the 5 basses that were being used. And when every time I was asked about the show, people were asking, well, what does the music sound like? What's the vibe? And the best description that I could find was, imagine 21st century chamber music, extremely modern, sometimes harsh, sometimes using harmonies that are distinctly not pleasing. You imagine that with Peter Gabriel's rhythm section. Okay, so you have this rhythm section that draws from all sorts of grooves, influences, world music, sounds, all of that, right? So that was the best description that I came up with. I got introduced to the show by its orchestrator, John Clancy, who is a drummer here in the city and also a very prolific orchestrator in the theater world. And he was the one who got me in, partially because he knew that I had a good understanding of the nuances that various basses can bring to the music. Now, what do I mean by that? What's going on, Jeffrey? Hey, David. I've had this conversation with a couple of my friends, and it kind of started, a couple musicians, and it kind of started with hanging out with Jeff Allen, who's another bass player here in the city. And he first introduced to me the concept of textures and how you can achieve textures in pop music or in music as a general by with using different bass sounds. Okay, just to give you an example, a jazz bass will sound different than a precision bass, right? A modern active bass will sound different than a passive bass, right? A Hafner will sound different than a solid body bass, a Hafner being semi-acoustic. So there you have it. You have all these different textures, right? Why not use them, okay? Why not use these sounds? It's just like Peter Gabriel having Tony Levin play, or Tony Levin coming up with that by himself, having him play a fretless bass, sometimes with fingers, sometimes with a pick, sometimes with an octave pedal, or using an electric upright live, or using the stick. Like all of these sounds are textures in a bigger sense in the bigger sense of the song. And what I try to do with Fun Home is bring that into this piece, into this piece of musical theater. And John Clancy's orchestrations called for that, okay? Like he, in his orchestrations, he had originally written in 4 basses, and I added the fretless because I thought it would sound really good. And in rehearsals, I played it for them, and they were okay with it, So, Michael Taylor, did you decide what basses you were using on what piece? Yes, well, to a certain degree I did, but John Clancy definitely had a good idea of what he wanted to hear. And all of that, came with the okay of Janine Tesori. Like, let's not forget that. Like, Janine always had the ultimate thumbs up or thumbs down, as it should be. She's a composer. So if anybody knows what music is supposed to sound like, it would probably be her, okay? Nevertheless, I did use a lot of my background and a lot of what I know John Clancy's background to be, to kind of solve the puzzle that Fun Home presented to me. On the one hand, you had this classical influence. You had, passages that were straight up chamber music, okay? I have played a lot of classical music. I have played a lot of atonal, modern classical music as well. I wouldn't say a lot of, but I've played enough to know what the necessities are, where, like, if there is a rub in the harmonies, at times it's supposed to be there, okay? So your intonation needs to be really strong, your sound production needs to be really strong. I'll give an example of that later on. But that was one side. The other side was, that was one part of it. That was the part dealing with the upright bass. When it came to the electric bass, the idea of textures, what I just talked about, really came to the forefront. So how do I introduce that? Those are questions that I asked myself at the time. How do I introduce these textures, and how do I make sure that they are being heard? On the one hand, you have the musical material, meaning the notes that you're supposed to play. And on the other hand, you have the sound that these notes produce and the sound with which you are playing them. So how do I get, and again, those were questions that I was asking myself. How can I make sure that these the differences in the bass sound get heard, okay? And one thing that I relied on heavily was splitting up my signal, Okay, so the way I did that, and it was somewhat different off Broadway than Broadway, than on Broadway. Off Broadway, I was using an Avalon U5 DI and an Ampeg amp, and basically all five basses went through both of those items, um, and signals from those two items went to front of house and to the monitors. Off Broadway, we didn't necessarily have a great monitoring system. I remember there being a monitor speaker about yay big, which didn't really do anything. So I don't think that I used it very much. But truth be told, where I was situated, I was next to the drums. I was between drums and violin and cello, and we were situated in front of the stage with, if I remember this correctly, speakers pretty much above us, pointing down at the audience and pointing into the the orchestra pit, as it were. So acoustically, I heard plenty off Broadway. I didn't necessarily need the monitor mixer, and if as a general rule of thumb, if I'm in a situation like that, I try to avoid using monitor mixers. If I hear enough, I hear enough. Like, I don't necessarily need to hear more. So all five basses went through the Avalon on one line and through the Ampeg on another line. And those two lines, the Avalon went straight to the house. The Ampeg had a microphone in front of its speaker, and that went to the house, and then they mixed it together. The thought behind that, or the concept behind it, was that the Avalon would provide a really clean signal, and the Ampeg added some grit. Like, the way I had it set was that it pretty much distorted quite a bit. It wasn't set to be super loud, but it was only set to distort a lot. And then you had the clean signal and the distorted signal, and you mix those two together, and you have a great bass sound. Okay, that was the idea of Broadway. I'm not going to go into the craziness that it took to get five basses into two lines. Okay, that was off Broadway. That was a mixture of various A/B boxes. Sometimes I had to turn on a boost in order, because every bass has a different output level. It was a lot, all right. And kudos to my subs at the time. I know Lindsay Horner was subbing. I believe Brad Russell was subbing for me. Wyeth Twange was subbing for me. If I'm forgetting someone, please forgive me. It's not because you didn't do a great job. You did an awesome job, and I'm just forgetting a lot of people, forgetting names. Nevertheless, kudos to my subs who who really rose to the challenge and played that show off Broadway, because that was not easy. Okay, during the course of the show, you had to unplug certain instruments, plug them in somewhere else, hit an A/B switch, put them down. Sometimes you had, during the course of one song, you had to play two instruments, which meant, say if you were to start out on the upright bass, put the upright bass down, pick up another bass, make sure that that one was plugged in, hit the A/B switch, perhaps hit another switch somewhere. I don't remember where, but it was a lot. It was a lot. So when we finally did move to a Broadway stage, I thought that, okay, I have to fix this, and I got myself a small mixer, 4 to 8 track mixer, 8-track mixer. That's what it was. And plugged all of the basses into the mixer, made that way I could make sure that all of the basses had that I could adjust the output volume, so all of the basses had the same output volume, and from the mixer, from my mixer, it went into one line went into the Avalon again, and one line went this time not into an Ampeg, it went into a Sans amp, because on Broadway I didn't want to use an amp, and I don't believe that there was enough space anywhere to put an amp. I'm pretty sure also the sound department tried to get me off that idea of using two lines. And then I came, no, but you could use the Sans amp, you can still use two lines. And they were like, oh, damn it. He found a way. He bested us. So either way, again, one line was with the Avalon, very clean, very strong, very clean. The other one was with the Sans amp, completely distorted. And those two lines were mixed together for front of house. Hey, what's going on, Peter? Sean Murphy, Doris Reiner, hello. Ryan Berg, what's going on? Oh yeah, Skip Ward was subbing for me as well. That was it. Hey, what's going on, Martin? So we managed to. You would probably ask, how strong were those two bass signals? And from what I could gather from our sound department at the time, what they were doing 60% of the Avalon, of the clean signal, 40% of the distorted signal, to at times 70% of the Avalon to 30% of the Sans amp signal. So there was always a certain amount of distortion in my signal, in the sound that you could hear outside. Now, one thing that needs to be kind of addressed is how necessary is all of that, okay? How necessary is it to have 5 basses in a show? How necessary is it to use 2 lines, send them to front of house, send them to the monitors? We're playing a musical theater show. It's not about the bass, obviously, but how big of a necessity is all of that? And I don't necessarily have a good answer what that is concerned. I can only say that this is how I chose to interpret this music. This was, again, this was done together with the orchestrator. This was done together with the composer. It was, we decided to kind of go for it. And at times, of course, there's significant pushback in terms of we can't hear the lyrics. We it's not that important, or I don't want emphasis to be taken away from the scene on the stage and all of that. And all of those are valid arguments, and there's a certain amount of give and take that is a necessity, in order to make a production work. Nevertheless, I thought that it merited taking a special approach, or taking, basically going the extra mile, and being specific about your sounds, being specific about how you want to sound, and not just any old bass sound that you can hear anywhere. Why not be specific about this? Why not? There was not necessarily that much interpretation that I could add to the music, because the music was all original. It was not like Ain't Too Proud, where you got this incredible treasure of Jameson's bass lines that you can interpret in one way or another, or that you can add to the catalog of the Temptations, right? Um, no, with Fun Home you had all original music, never heard before, never played before, and you needed to make that come to life. So I had to pretty much stick to the music on the page, but where I was able to add some interpretation was the sound of things. And using two lines, one distorted, one clean, using five instruments was what that's kind of what I came up with, or came up with together with the orchestrator John Clancy. Uh, so I would probably need to make another video about what it means to play a show, or what the various difficulties or pleasures are of playing a show. That's a different video. Right now, this is about preparing for Fun Home. So once we had the sound kind of figured out, you know what? Why don't I just give you an example of what I'm talking about, so you guys can really get into it. Yeah, let me use this one here. This was one of the basses that I played on the show. I played for one song, I played a 65, 66 Hafner, which should be over here. Hold on a second. I'll be right back. Let me just show you this. So this was the Hafner that I played while the show was off Broadway. This is a 65, 66 Hafner club bass. There was a song in the show that, if I remember this correctly, it was supposed to sound like the Brady Bunch, maybe, and once I heard, and it also had in the description of it, to be played with a precision or a Hafner. So as it turns out, I had a Hafner, and I was like, okay, let me bring it in. And I used it all throughout the off-Broadway production. Once we went to Broadway, I knew that I was going to have more than three subs. And this bass is old. It sounds great. I love the way it sounds, and I'll probably have to do another video because I tried to recreate the setup here, and I didn't quite get close. I was able to recreate some of it, but not a lot. I will do another video about the sounds of Fun Home. So for now, just hang in there. This was one of the basses, and once we moved to Broadway, I got the production to get me a replacement for the Hafner, and that was this Epiphone Alum tribute bass, which I absolutely love. It's one of I kind of dug the idea that Alan Woody, if you're not familiar, Alan Woody was the bass player for the Allman Brothers for a long time, and at a time when when there were a lot of signature instruments out there, and they were all, going hi-fi, using active electronics, exotic woods, etc., Alan Woody also was approached in order to make a signature bass of his, and he went the other direction. He went lo-fi, so this bass is, again, semi-acoustic, and is kind of like a Hafner club bass, but in a kind of updated modern version. It stays in tune a lot better than the original, and pickups are somewhat different. Nevertheless, it's a fantastic instrument. I really dug it. So I asked the production to get this for me, and they were kind enough to do so. And let me just show you what I mean by the two different sounds, and I hope that, let's see if I did this right. So this was the clean signal, right? sound, good sound. And then this was the distorted signal. Just gotta watch out what levels are concerned. This was the distorted signal. And what I ended up doing was I ended up mixing those two signals together to sort of come to a sound that was close to this. A little more distortion and a little more presence. So once again, clean sound. And this was the sound that actually was played in the theater. So, and all basses had the same treatment. Yeah. So this was the same sound was being used for the Hafner, for the precision bass, for the fretted 5-string, for the fretless 5-string. And for the upright. There was always a certain amount of distortion in the signal chain, and I really enjoyed that. The other thing that the sound department did, and I was very, very grateful to them for doing that, they sent 2 signals to us, to our Avalon or Avion systems. So the Avion system, for those who don't know, is a monitoring system that lets you basically mix the sound that you hear in your headphones. So we had 2 lines. We had Partridge Family. Thank you, Joey. That was it. We had 2 lines. Oh, can you hear me now? How is that? That came back from front of house to the monitoring. And that definitely, made it also possible for us musicians to mix the clean bass sound with the distorted bass sound. Now, do I know whether the other musicians use that? I have no way of knowing, okay? One of our musicians was the guitar player Doug Derryberry, who's a great, aside from being a fantastic guitar player, who's also a very accomplished and great music producer. And he was like, I love this. This is exactly how I want to hear bass. I can mix it together. This was awesome. So, it really depended on whatever they wanted to do. Nevertheless, let me see how much time. Well, we're 38 minutes out. There are a lot of questions coming in right now. What's going on, James? Hey, David. All right, Sadi Same wants to know. I was also curious as to what they did when the show went on the road as far as number of basses and what the bass signal was. I guess that's what you meant. It was supposed to be coming to DC this spring. I was going to try to find out, of course, but it got cancelled. Yeah, I would imagine so. I subbed on the show when it went on the road, and I played it. Joey was there. That's how I met Joey. I was in San Francisco with it, and then I was also in Los Angeles with it. I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure that Alan Hewitt, who was the bass player on the tour, he did not have 5 basses, but he had 3, I believe. He was using an upright bass, a fretted 5-string, and a fretless 5-string. Okay, so, and 3 basses are fairly simple to mix together. You can even get yourself an A/B switch with 3 inputs and go from one to the next to the next. That was not a problem at all. Partridge Family. Thanks, Joey. That's I never saw the show. No idea what people were talking about. Um, let's see. Dennis Farrelly wants to know there was a 16 or maybe 32 bar improvised section. Learned what you played on recording more or less. Did you play it more or less the same every night? Yes, yes. I played it pretty much the same every night. Um, and I love coming up with good parts and then sticking with them. I think that makes a lot of sense. That makes playing the show. And also, let's not forget, like we are not in. We don't necessarily have the luxury of being in a jazz club where improvisation as such is what people go to hear. You know, that's they go to a jazz club to hear improvisation, to hear the interaction, the spontaneous. What's the word I'm looking for? Interaction between musicians on a stage and perhaps also with the audience. Uh, in a theater setting, hey, what's going on, Roger? In a theater setting, that's not that's not necessarily what people came there to see. Although, uh, in one of my next episodes, I'm going to talk about a show I did where that was exactly what we needed to do. So, but that's another episode of show preparation. Um, so, yeah, the improvised section was pretty much the same every night. It was important for it to stay the same because at the same while I was improvising, we had three actors who were actually kids, and I'm like, what were their ages? I'm trying to remember. I believe 7, 10, and maybe 12, 14, something like that. Anyway, they were very young. Um, they had to sing over what I was improvising. Okay, so there was no reason to play something, that was just gonna come out of left field. Might be correct, might not be correct, but will definitely throw them. Because while they are singing to this improvised bass line, they are also dancing around. They're, hitting marks on stage. They have to move furniture on stage. Uh, it, there was no room for that to change every night. That would have been totally inappropriate and dangerous. It's the things can, on a theater stage, things can go haywire and from awesome to really bad, really fast. Okay, and that would be, one of these moments where no, you don't want to risk it. You don't want to risk it, and I'm not saying this because I'm afraid or anything, but since I am a professional, the idea here is to be consistent and give the actors something that they can rely on. Because while I'm in the security and safety of the pit or of my chair on stage or whatever, they are jumping around and they are hitting marks and they have to deal with, audience members and lights and not hearing themselves, etc., etc. So no, there was no. This was a very long answer. I've said this before. I don't give short answers. um, let's see. I don't see anymore. Hey, what's going on, Ruben? Good to see you. Ivan, good to see you, man. Um, Let me see if I can find some more questions here. David White wants to know, is that your general experience with orchestras, that they're open to players' input? Well, that's a good question. It really depends. And again, this would probably be best explained in a separate video, which I can do. Yeah, sometimes orchestrators are open to ideas. I had this conversation with my partner Alexis, and she pointed out something. She had a great way of putting this because she's also a songwriter, and sometimes as a songwriter, and I'm putting songwriter and orchestrator now in one category. Okay, sometimes as a songwriter, you don't know the vibe of a song. You have certain ideas that you want the song to convey. Okay, be it emotionally or lyrically, musically, harmonically, rhythmically, whatever the category might be. But until you present it to, and again, this is not set in stone, but until you present it to musicians, you might not have a totally clear idea of what the vibe of a song should be. You know, is this a rock song? Is this, you know, you kind of have a tempo for it, and that probably tells you whether it's a ballad or a medium tempo or a fast song, you know, whether it's a dance track or whatever. But you might not have a distinct idea of what the vibe is. So with Fun Home, the they definitely, they meaning John Clancy and Janine Tesori, gave me a lot of freedom to give my input, right? And then also be very, very specific. I didn't necessarily add notes to what was already written, but I took a lot away. So I did, now that I'm thinking about it, I did interpret in terms of deduction. You know, I took certain lines that I thought were getting in the way. And they were kind enough to take that input and run with it, you know. Joey wants to know, you joined in the move from public to circle or earlier. Yeah, as I said already, like I did the show off Broadway and Broadway. So let's see, I have a new comment down here somewhere. Not really seeing any new comments. Wait, what's going on, Camilo? Good to see you. I hope that this level is better now. You guys let me know if you hear this or not. Anyway, we're getting close to the end of this week's live video, but I hope that this gave you sort of an idea of what it took to get Fun Home, to make Fun Home come alive from the bass chair. There was a couple more things that I want to mention. The music itself, and again, it took me a long time to get into it. The music itself was very much 70s inspired. The story is set, I believe, in the late 70s, early 80s. So this kind of 70s music definitely played a big part in what Janine Tesori wrote and how she hears music. The specific artists that I heard in her music were Kate Bush, James Taylor, and then I always get these names wrong. Carole King, Laura Nero, you know, definitely the theatrical works of The Who, meaning Tommy and Quadrophenia. I heard influences by Pink Floyd. Yeah, so I think that kind of, and like Pink Floyd, The Wall, that kind of era, and all of that was late 70s going into early 80s. So all of that's kind of the music that I heard when I first had to play through. Let me rephrase that. That's the music that I heard in the material. Okay, that's the music that it reminded me of. And in preparing for this show, I went back and listened to all of those albums. I listened to a lot of James Taylor. I went back and listened to Kate Bush's first and second album. I forgot their names right now. Anyway, I definitely went and listened to The Wall. I listened to Quadrophenia and Tommy. I'm a big Who fan anyway because I love John Entwistle and I loved what he did. So that was always that's always kind of in the back of my mind. Um, and perhaps the idea of using distortion on the bass, um, that's probably that has a lot to do with Entwistle as well. Let's see. Supposedly there's a new comment. Hey, there it is. Redbone, yes, absolutely. Redbone was a big 70s thing. Skip Ward, no doubt, absolutely. Was Circle in the Square in the round, Circle in the Square in the round difficult to perform in. The sound design for the audience was good. Well, Joey, here's the thing. Um, Fun Home was the second time that I was in Circle in the Square, and the previous show that for those who don't know, Circle in the Square is a theater here in New York City. It's a Broadway theater that is, as they say, in the round, meaning the stage is in the center and the audience sits in a sort of circle around the stage. And Fun Home was the second show that I did in that theater, and the one that I did before that was Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill. So altogether, I was at Circle in the Square because Lady Day was the show before Fun Home went into Circle in the Square. Altogether, I was at the same theater for 3 years. And I got to know the entire staff very well. It was my second home. I have great memories about Circle in the Square. Everybody there was so nice, was so into the music, was so into the production. It is a special place, and I loved it. I absolutely love it for that. It's also one of the smaller theaters. I think it seats a little over 700 every night. So it was great times, Circle in the Square. It was not difficult to perform in the round. Again, we are using the Aviom system, so we are on headphones most of the time. And the minute you have that, we are actually. I always find that we musicians we have the best seat in the house because we can make sure that we are in control of what we hear, and what we hear influences what we play, and that's our primary, or at least should be our primary connection to what's happening on stage. So that's I hope that answers the question. So I'm gonna wrap this up today. I hope you guys got some good info out of this. As I said, Fun Home was one of the more difficult shows for me to get into musically. There's a lot of influences in that show. There's a lot of seemingly different styles of music being played. There's a lot of instruments that had to be mastered. But I enjoyed it very much. It was one of those shows that was the underdog, and I always root for the underdog. That's just me. I was so happy when it won Best New Musical. It was the fourth show of mine that really made fourth show where I had the chair that made a big that had a big impact. It broke down some glass ceilings. It broke down some walls. The story of Fun Home, and I thought that was kind of remarkable also, because it did reverberate with the audience, and very much the story of Fun Home was what happens when you live a lie. I know that from my family, which was not my family was not the best situation. There's a lot of drama, for a lack of better word. So I could relate to it, and I could sort of see how the audience uh, started to relate to the overall theme of what it means to live a lie, and how that not only affects your own life, but if you are in a family situation, like this stuff spreads, okay, and it affects everybody. Um, so I thought it was an incredible achievement that a show with something so personal uh, made a big splash, and really found an audience, and got and won a bunch of awards, and I'm very, very happy for them. I'm very happy for the creative team that got recognition through it. I'm very happy to have been a part of that show, because once again, this was unlike anything else that I had done before that. So I hope you guys got some good info out of this. I want to thank all of you for spending the time once again with me. I'm very grateful for all of you to come back week after week. I think I'm beyond thrilled about that. And as I say every week, uh, be cool, be kind, and just remember that we only have each other. So stay safe out there. All right, I'll see you all soon.